Imagine you spent your entire life working hard, sacrificing your time, your energy, your youth for a single dream, to finally have a home of your own, a place to retire, to spend your golden years in peace with your family. This is exactly what John, a retired Navy veteran, and his wife, Susan, had worked for. After decades of serving their country, they had finally found their dream home, a quiet, modest house with a backyard where their grandkids could play. But as they began to settle into their peaceful new life, little did they know that a storm was brewing in the form of a seemingly sweet neighbor. A neighbor who would stop at nothing to destroy the peace they had worked so hard for. The worst part? They had no idea how deep the trouble ran until it was too late. What started as a simple refusal to join the local HOA would soon escalate into a battle of wills, a fight for justice, and a shocking turn of events that would change everything. What happens when the dream of peace is shattered by someone with more power than you could ever imagine? Get ready, because this is a story of how one man's quiet dream would turn into a nightmare, and how the most unexpected enemy came crashing down on his family. There comes a time in life when you work hard enough, when the long hours, the sacrifices, the stress of raising kids and holding down a job finally start to pay off. For John, a retired Navy veteran, and his wife, Susan, this time had finally arrived. After decades of service, after countless years of giving their best to their family, they had earned the right to enjoy a peaceful life. They bought a house in a quiet suburban neighborhood, one that looked like it had been plucked straight out of a dream. No flashy exterior or expensive upgrades, just a modest 3-bedroom house with a large backyard, a place where their grandkids could come visit, where John could sit on his porch and reflect on the years gone by, where Susan could bake pies in the kitchen she always dreamed of. John and Susan weren't expecting perfection. They didn't need to live in the most expensive neighborhood or have the largest home. All they wanted was peace. But life had a way of throwing curveballs at them, even when they thought they'd found the safety of home. And it wasn't a job loss or an illness that would come to test them. It was something more subtle, something that could have been avoided had they known how deep the problems ran in their new community. The HOA, the Homeowners Association, was there, lurking behind the scenes. They thought it would be a mere formality, a minor nuisance. But soon, they would learn that this community organization wasn't just about keeping things tidy. It was about control. And the first time they felt its grip was when Karen, a woman they never expected to play a part in their lives, came to their door with a casserole and an agenda. It wasn't just about welcoming them. It was about making them feel small, making them feel like they didn't belong unless they conformed. IT started innocently enough, or at least it seemed that way. Karen, the self-appointed enforcer of the neighborhood's HOA rules, knocked on their door one afternoon. She wore oversized sunglasses, a forced smile, and brought a casserole, a classic welcome to the neighborhood gesture, or so John thought. Susan was touched, though a little skeptical. They had both lived enough years to know when something wasn't quite right. The smile didn't quite reach Karen's eyes, and when the casserole was put down, Karen slid a thick packet of HOA rules onto their kitchen counter. "I know you're not official in the HOA," Karen said, her voice saccharine sweet, "but I really think it's in your best interest to join. It'll make life so much easier for everyone." John nodded politely, as he always did, but something about her tone set off a red flag. She didn't care if they weren't a part of the HOA. What she cared about was their submission, their compliance. She wanted control. He declined, firmly but respectfully, not wanting to get involved with yet another set of rules that would limit their freedom. And for a moment, he thought that would be the end of it. But Karen, like a slow-burning fire, didn't let things go that easily. As she left, she gave a final, overly bright smile that seemed to promise more trouble in the future than it did goodwill. John, feeling uneasy, looked at Susan. "We just wanted peace," he muttered under his breath, the weight of the situation not yet fully sinking in. But Karen's parting words echoed in his mind. It's easier to stay on good terms with everyone when you're part of the group. At first, the HOA was a distant worry, a small inconvenience that John and Susan had to navigate. But as time passed, they started to feel the ripples of Karen's influence in subtle ways. It started with little things. Sly remarks when John was outside tending to his garden, or the occasional side-eye when he waved at neighbors. Karen would talk about community pride, yet her actions spoke of something far more sinister. control and submission. Their front yard, free from HOA strict guidelines, became a target of criticism. While the rest of the neighborhood adhered to precise and uniform regulations of the HOA, John and Susan's lawn was allowed to grow freely, with flowers and plants chosen by them, not dictated by some rule book. It was their own personal space, their sanctuary, and Karen couldn't stand it. Every time she passed by, she would look at it with disdain, and John could feel the judgment in her gaze. Then one morning, John walked outside to find that their garbage cans were missing. It wasn't a huge deal, at least at first. Maybe the wind had blown them away, he thought. But when they were found 2 days later, tucked behind the HOA's community center, something didn't sit right. And when John noticed the cans were the only green ones in the neighborhood, his green cans, with their house number written on the side, he knew he wasn't imagining things. This was the beginning of a much more deliberate and dangerous campaign of harassment. And Karen, who seemed so sweet and welcoming, was a mastermind behind it all. As the weeks dragged on, Karen's little pranks became more daring. Trash started to appear on John's lawn. Empty soda cans, fast food wrappers, a crushed milk carton. It was obvious. Someone was making a point, and that someone was Karen. It wasn't enough to simply control the yard. Karen wanted to control how John and Susan lived. It was a slow, insidious process, each act wearing away at their patience, their peace of mind. But John had learned over the years that when life hands you a challenge, you face it head-on, and so he did. He fought back in his own way, with small acts of rebellion. When trash appeared on the lawn, he'd pick it up and walk it over to Karen's pristine front yard, casually tossing it onto her flower bed, a silent statement of defiance. But it wasn't just the trash that kept things boiling. One night, after his car was egged again, an act of pure malice, John realized it was no longer just about property. It was about dignity, about his right to live without fear of intimidation. So he played a dangerous game of retaliation. He knew he shouldn't escalate the situation, but every time Karen did something petty, he felt like he had no choice. It wasn't about winning. It was about making sure she knew that no one could push him around. The once peaceful neighborhood was now a battleground. John stood frozen on his front lawn, watching the damage unfold in front of him. The massive semi-truck, driven by Karen, continued its destructive path across his carefully manicured yard. The grass was torn apart, deep tire ruts gouged into the earth, leaving a permanent scar that no amount of watering or gardening could fix. His car, once parked safely in the driveway, was now a tragic sight. The trailer's corner had scraped along the side, crushing the driver's door and pushing the car sideways into the garage, leaving it crumpled like a tin can. It wasn't just the physical damage that hit John hard. It was the sheer audacity of Karen's actions. To drive onto his lawn without a care, to destroy his property, and then to sit there with that smug smile on her face. It was more than just a violation. It was a personal attack. His heart pounded in his chest, the shock of it all slowly starting to turn into anger. But Karen, as if she had done nothing wrong, leaned out of the cab, a smirk playing across her lips. "Hey there," she called out, as though she were simply popping over for coffee. John's mind raced. His eyes flicked to his wife, Susan, who had appeared behind him on the porch, a mixture of confusion and fury on her face. "Is she serious?" Susan hissed. The kids were upstairs, their playful shouts drowned out by the blaring horn of the truck, which now seemed to echo through the entire neighborhood. Neighbors, drawn out by the noise, peeked through their windows, some laughing nervously, others unsure what to make of the absurdity unfolding on the once quiet street. John could feel the blood rushing to his head. This wasn't just about his car or his lawn. It was about respect, about his right to live in peace without someone's misplaced sense of power ruining everything. He took a step forward, waving his arms to get Karen's attention. "Karen, get this truck off my property right now," he shouted, his voice cracking with disbelief. But Karen, unfazed by the destruction she had caused, merely shrugged and continued to honk the horn, oblivious of the chaos she was creating. John's chest tightened with the weight of frustration. How had it come to this? He had never wanted trouble, just a quiet place to spend his days. But now, he was stuck in a nightmare with a woman who was determined to make his life a living hell. In that moment, as John stood helpless on his lawn, he made a decision. If Karen wasn't going to back down, neither would he. It was time to turn the tables. He knew that if he didn't act, if he didn't stand up for himself now, Karen would continue to torment him and his family. His mind raced as he pulled out his phone, the idea of recording the event dawning on him. It wasn't just about proving a point. It was about having evidence of her arrogance, her disregard for anyone but herself. As he began filming, he kept his voice steady, though his heart was pounding. "This is Karen," he said into the camera, his voice firm. "She's parked a semi on my lawn without permission, completely blocking my driveway and refusing to leave. She's also honking the horn like a maniac." He zoomed in on her smug expression, capturing every detail of the scene. The truck, the torn-up lawn, the smirk on her face. It was as if she thought she was untouchable, that she could do whatever she wanted without consequences. When Karen saw him recording, for the first time, her expression faltered. The smile that had once been so confident and smug vanished, replaced by a look of panic. "You can't record me," she shouted from the cab, her voice suddenly defensive, as though she had something to hide. But John didn't stop. He kept the camera steady, capturing her panic, her desperation to cover up her reckless actions. This wasn't just about a neighborhood dispute anymore. It was about holding someone accountable, showing the world the truth of what had happened. And then, Karen did what no one could have predicted. She started the truck and attempted to back it up, try to leave the scene and escape the consequences of her actions. But in her haste, she misjudged the angle. John watched in horror as the trailer swung around, heading straight for his car. "Stop!" he screamed, waving his arms frantically, but it was too late. The edge of the trailer slammed into the driver's side of his car with a sickening crunch. The sound of metal crushing and glass shattering filled the air, and John could only watch in stunned silence as his car was pushed sideways, its tail light shattered, the side panel crumpling under the weight of the truck. Karen froze for a moment, staring at the wreckage she had caused. It was as if time had stopped, and in that split second, she realized the gravity of what she had done. But instead of taking responsibility, she panicked. She threw the truck into drive, tried to escape, but the wheels spun uselessly in the mud she had created. The truck was stuck, and she was now trapped in the mess she had made. John, still in shock, could hardly process what had just happened. His heart ached as he looked at the damage to his car, the symbol of his hard work and years of dedication, now reduced to a crumpled wreck. But more than that, he felt a surge of anger. This wasn't just an accident. This was a deliberate act of aggression. It was a betrayal of the trust he had once had in his neighbors, in the community that had once seemed like a safe place. As Karen abandoned the truck and ran down the street, leaving the chaos behind her, John knew that this wasn't something he could just ignore. He called the police, his hands shaking as he dialed the number. There was no question in his mind that this needed to be reported. This wasn't just a prank or an act of petty vandalism. This was trespassing, property damage, and reckless endangerment, all wrapped into one. The police arrived within minutes, taking in the scene with the same disbelief that John had felt. He showed them the video of Karen honking the horn, destroying his property, and then fleeing the scene. "She really just ran off?" one of the officers asked, shaking his head in disbelief. "Yep," John replied, his voice steady now, but filled with the weight of what had happened. The trial began, and the small-town courthouse was packed with people eager to see the outcome. The story of Karen's reckless actions had spread like wildfire, and now, everyone was waiting to see if justice would prevail. The video of the semi-truck incident played on the courtroom monitors, and as John watched it, his heart swelled with both anger and relief. This was it, the moment he'd been waiting for, when Karen would finally face the consequences of her actions. The evidence against her was overwhelming. The police reports, the photos of the damage, the video, all of it painted a clear picture of someone who had acted with malice, someone who believed they could get away with anything. Karen's lawyer tried to argue that the video had been edited, but it was an absurd claim easily dismissed by the prosecutor. They also tried to paint Karen as a victim, claiming that John had provoked her by not joining the HOA. But the jury wasn't buying it. The prosecutor's words were sharp and to point. Driving a semi-truck onto someone's property, destroying their lawn, crashing into their car, and then fleeing the scene isn't just a point. It's a crime. It didn't take long for the jury to reach a verdict. The words "guilty on all charges" rang through the courtroom, and John felt a sense of vindication he had never known before. After months of harassment, after everything Karen had put him and his family through, justice had finally been served. Karen's sentencing was just the beginning of a much larger shift. The video of the semi-truck incident, shared by John's wife, Susan, had gone viral. It was more than just a local issue now. It had become a symbol of the unchecked power of HOAs and the abuse of authority. People from all over the country shared their own stories of HOA harassment, and soon, the community that had once been dominated by Karen's iron fist was rallying for change. Local news outlets picked up the story, putting pressure on the HOA and its board members to answer for their complicity in Karen's actions. As the scrutiny mounted, the other board members, one by one, began to resign, unable to withstand the backlash. The tension in the air was palpable. For the first time in years, the residents of the neighborhood felt like they had a voice, and they weren't going to stay silent anymore. A new election was held, and for the first time, the process was transparent and open. The new board, eager to rebuild trust with the community, promised reforms. They limited the HOA's enforcement powers, implemented financial transparency, and created a grievance process that gave homeowners a real say in how things were run. It was a turning point, not just for John and his family, but for the entire neighborhood. What had started as a personal battle for justice had become a movement for change, one that would ensure that no one else would have to suffer under the weight of an unchecked, overbearing HOA ever again.